Chicago, winter 1933. The Great Depression had settled over the South Side like a fog that wouldn't lift. The Carter family lived in a two-room apartment above a grocery store on 43rd Street. In the heart of what white Chicago called the Black Belt, that narrow strip of the city where restrictive covenants and racial violence confined nearly 300,000 African Americans to an area designed for perhaps a third that number. The apartment was cold in winter, stifling in summer, always too small. But Ruth Carter kept it immaculate. She believed in dignity as a form of resistance, in pressed clothes and polished shoes and perfect grammar as armor against a world that wanted to see her family as less than human. Her husband, Isaiah Carter, worked inconsistent hours at a meatpacking plant when his leg allowed. The leg that had caught German shrapnel in France in 1918. The leg that never healed right. The leg that reminded him every day that he had fought for freedoms America would not grant him. He rarely spoke about the war, about serving with the 369th Infantry Regiment, the Harlem Hellfighters, about the Bronze Star pinned to a uniform he kept wrapped in paper in the back of the closet. But he kept his service rifle. A 1917 Enfield, wrapped in oilcloth, hidden behind winter coats. 12-year-old Maya found it while searching for Christmas presents. She didn't touch it that first time, just looked, fascinated by its weight, its precision, the way it represented a chapter of her father's life he would not discuss. She came back to look at it again and again. The rats came that winter, the worst year of the Depression, when families in the building couldn't afford to dispose of garbage properly, and the creatures multiplied in the walls and alleys. They were bold, those rats, big as cats, some of them, utterly unafraid of humans. They ate through food supplies that families could not afford to replace. They bit children in their sleep. Old Mrs. Patterson on the third floor contracted an infection from a bite and lost her hand. Isaiah Carter was too exhausted, too broken by his wounds and his disappointments to address the problem. So Maya took matters into her own hands. She retrieved the Enfield from the closet, found the box of ammunition hidden behind it, taught herself to shoot. She couldn't fire the weapon, of course. The noise would have brought police, complaints, chaos. A 12-year-old colored girl with a rifle would not end well. So she practiced everything else, loading and unloading by feel alone, in total darkness, breathing, stance, trigger discipline. She read everything she could find about marksmanship at the public library. Military manuals, hunting guides, anything with information about ballistics and windage and the geometry of sending a small piece of metal exactly where you wanted it to go. Then she turned to other weapons, quieter ones. A slingshot first, then a pellet gun purchased with 6 months of saved pennies. Money earned running errands for neighbors, pennies hoarded like treasure. She practiced in the alley behind the building, in the grey hours before dawn, when she could see well enough to aim, but the neighborhood was still asleep. The rats became her targets. They were quick, unpredictable. They required precision. They did not give second chances. If you missed, they disappeared into the walls. If you wounded one, it screamed and brought the others. You had to make the first shot count. 1 shot, 1 kill. By the time Maya was 14, she was the most accurate shooter on the south side of Chicago. Nobody knew it except the rats and her own quiet satisfaction. By 16, she could put a pellet through a bottle cap at 30 meters. She had rid her building so thoroughly of vermin that neighbors started asking Isaiah what his secret was. He discovered what his daughter had been doing on an April morning in 1937. He woke early with his leg aching, walked to the kitchen for water. Through the window, he saw Maya in the alley below, utterly still, utterly focused, the pellet gun raised and ready. He watched her wait, watched her breathe, watched the patience that most soldiers never learned even after years of training. A rat emerged from behind a trash can, moving fast, erratic. Maya did not rush. She waited for the moment, the one perfect moment when the target paused, when all the variables aligned. She took the shot. The rat dropped mid-stride, instant death. Isaiah never mentioned what he saw. But that evening, He took the Enfield from the closet, sat down at the kitchen table, began to teach his daughter everything he knew about shooting, the principles of trajectory, the mathematics of distance, how to read wind by watching grass and leaves and the flight of birds, how to wait, sometimes for hours, for the right moment, the only moment, and most importantly, how to remain calm when everything depended on a single, irreversible action. Father and daughter sat at that kitchen table 2 or 3 evenings a week for the next 2 years, the rifle between them, speaking a language of angles and adjustments that Ruth Carter did not understand but recognized as something precious. A bridge between her husband's broken past and her daughter's uncertain future. Isaiah never explained why he was teaching her these things. Perhaps he sensed even then that another war was coming. Perhaps he simply needed to pass on the one thing the country had given him that still felt wholly his own. Perhaps he saw in his daughter's patience and precision a gift that deserved to be cultivated. On a spring evening in 1939, as Maya cleaned the Enfield after practice, Isaiah spoke words he had never said before. "War's coming, baby girl, I can feel it. Same way I felt it in 17. Maya looked up from the rifle. Her father's face was serious, sad. "When it comes," he said quietly, "you'll need this more than I did." Maya was 18 years old, working as a secretary at a black-owned insurance company on South Parkway. She followed the news carefully, tracing German advances on maps she bought at the 5 and dime, imagining the distances, the terrain, the challenges of sending accurate fire across the hedgerows and forests she read about in newspaper accounts. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, she knew immediately that she would find a way to serve. The obstacles were immense. The American military was rigidly segregated, black soldiers confined to support roles and labor battalions, denied the opportunity to serve in combat positions where they might prove themselves equal to white soldiers. The Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, established in May 1942, accepted black women, but only in limited numbers, in segregated units, exclusively in administrative and support positions. The idea of a black woman serving as a combat soldier, let alone a sniper, was so far outside the realm of possibility that it did not even register as something to be formally prohibited. It was simply unthinkable. Maya Carter thought it anyway. She enlisted in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps in August 1942. 2 weeks after the first class of black women was accepted, she was assigned to a segregated unit at Fort Des Moines, Iowa, where she trained as a typist and file clerk. She excelled at the work. She had always been organized and precise, but she made sure to also excel at everything physical. She was the fastest runner in her unit. She scored highest on every fitness assessment. When a training sergeant organized informal marksmanship practice for interested personnel, she attended every session, careful to perform well, but not so well as to draw excessive attention. She was drawing attention anyway. Her unit commander, Captain Virginia Bennett, was a 42-year-old former schoolteacher from Alabama. She had joined the Corps with modest expectations and found herself constantly surprised by the quality of the women under her command. She noticed Maya Carter immediately, noticed her discipline, her intelligence, the way other women in the unit naturally looked to her for guidance. During a routine inspection in October 1942, Captain Bennett asked Maya what she hoped to do in the military. Maya considered lying, considered saying something safe about wanting to serve her country in whatever capacity was needed, about being grateful for the opportunity, about not expecting anything beyond what was offered. But something in Captain Bennett's eyes made her tell the truth. A directness, a genuine curiosity. "I want to be a sniper, Ma'am." The words hung in the air between them. Captain Bennett was quiet for a long moment. Then she said that what Maya wanted was impossible. The military would never allow it. Society would never accept it. The very idea would be seen as absurd, offensive, dangerous to the established order. "I understand, Ma'am." "Do you?" "Yes, Ma'am. But I can still type faster if you teach me." Captain Bennett laughed, a short, surprised sound. Then she said something else. Something that would change the trajectory of Maya Carter's service. I have a cousin in the Office of Strategic Services, the intelligence agency. They operate behind enemy lines. They're less rigid than the regular military, more willing to use unconventional personnel for unconventional missions." She paused, met Maya's eyes. "I can't promise anything, but I could write a letter." Maya Carter spent the next 14 months typing, filing, and waiting. She continued her private marksmanship practice whenever possible, maintaining her skills with whatever weapons she could access. She studied maps of Europe, learned basic French from a borrowed grammar book, read everything she could find about German military tactics and equipment, and she waited. The letter that changed her life arrived in December 1943, brief, official, revealing almost nothing. She was to report to a training facility in Virginia for assessment regarding specialized duties. No details about what those duties might be or why she had been selected. Just an order to report. The night before she left, her father called her into the kitchen, the same kitchen where he had taught her to calculate windage and bullet drop. He looked older now. The war years had aged him. The limp was worse. "They'll use you, Maya. Use what you can do. Then they'll forget you. Bury your record. Pretend you never existed." He reached across the table, took her hand, just like they did to me and every other colored soldier who ever wore this country's uniform. Maya nodded. She knew this already, had accepted it as the price of what she wanted to do. "But you're still going to go," Isaiah said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "You know why?" "Because it's what we do." Isaiah Carter squeezed his daughter's hand. In his eyes, she saw pride mixed with sorrow, the burden of understanding what she was choosing, what it would cost her. "That's right, baby girl. It's what we do." The facility was a converted country estate in the Virginia countryside, surrounded by woods and security fences and an atmosphere of deliberate mystery. Maya arrived to find herself among perhaps 30 other candidates, all women, about a third of them black, all selected through similarly opaque processes. They were told they were being evaluated for potential service with the OSS, in roles that would be explained only to those who passed the assessment. The evaluation would last 3 weeks. It would be difficult. Most of them would not be selected. The first week focused on physical conditioning and basic military skills, the kind of training Maya had already mastered at Fort Des Moines. She performed well, but not exceptionally, still wary of standing out too much. The second week introduced more specialized content, map reading, surveillance techniques, basic intelligence gathering, the fundamentals of operating behind enemy lines. Maya excelled at all of it, her natural precision and patience serving her well in exercises that required observation and analysis. The third week brought weapons training, and Maya finally allowed herself to show what she could do. The instructor was a Marine Corps gunnery sergeant named Harold Cross, a veteran of the Pacific Campaign, missing the ring finger on his left hand, a permanent squint from too many years staring through rifle scopes. He taught the candidates to shoot the way he had been taught, through repetition, discipline, endless correction. He was methodical, demanding, completely uninterested in his students' backgrounds or personal stories. He cared only about results. On the first day of rifle training, he had each candidate fire 5 rounds at a target 50 meters away. Most of the women managed to hit the target. A few hit the center rings. Maya Carter put all 5 rounds through the same hole. Sergeant Cross walked down to the target, examined it, walked back. "Do it again." She did. Same result. He had her shoot at 75 meters, then 100, then 150. Her groups opened slightly a distance as they had to, but her accuracy remained exceptional. When he finally asked where she had learned to shoot, she told him the truth. "My father taught me, Sergeant. He served in the First War, and before that, I hunted rats in Chicago." Cross was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if she had ever shot at a living target larger than a rat. "No, Sergeant." "You think you could?" "Yes, Sergeant." "Why?" Maya met his eyes, thought about the question, about what he was really asking. "Because it would be necessary, Sergeant. And when something is necessary, you do it, whether you want to or not." Sergeant Cross told her to report to his office after dinner. When she arrived, she found him with 2 other people. a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Mrs. Davis, and a man in an army colonel's uniform who did not introduce himself at all. They asked her questions for 2 hours, about her family, her education, her motivations, about her political beliefs, her experiences with racism, her feelings about the military that had confined her to a typing pool, about her willingness to work alone, to endure hardship, to take lives in service of her mission. She answered honestly. She talked about her father and the pride he took in his service, despite everything the country had done to him. She talked about wanting to prove that black women were capable of more than the roles they were assigned. She talked about seeing the war as an opportunity, perhaps the only opportunity she would ever have to demonstrate her abilities on a stage where they could not be ignored or dismissed. The colonel leaned forward. "If you are captured, you will be treated as a spy, most likely executed. You understand this?" "Yes, sir." Mrs. Davies spoke next, her voice softer but no less serious. "Even if you succeed, the military may bury your record, may never acknowledge what we allowed. You might serve with distinction and die without recognition. Can you accept that?" Maya thought about her father, about the bronze star wrapped in paper, about the limp that reminded him every day of what he had given to a country that would not claim him. "I understand, Ma'am, but 47 American soldiers died 3 days ago because nobody could make the shot they needed. I can make that shot. That matters more than whether anyone knows my name." They told her to return to her barracks and wait. 3 days later, she was informed that she had been selected for advanced training as an OSS operative, specializing in precision marksmanship. She was, though no one said it explicitly, the first black woman in American history to be trained as a combat sniper. The next 6 months were the most challenging and exhilarating of Maya Carter's life. She trained at a series of facilities across the eastern United States, never staying in one place for more than a few weeks, learning skills that ranged from the technical to the seemingly impossible. Long-range shooting with the Springfield 1903 that would become her primary weapon. Silent movement through forests, fields, urban environments, hand-to-hand combat, demolitions, radio operation, survival techniques, resistance to interrogation, parachute jumping, the French language, in which she became reasonably fluent, and above all, the art of patience, of waiting for hours or days in uncomfortable positions, in bad weather, under constant threat, for a single opportunity that might last only a fraction of a second. Her primary instructor during this period was a British commando named Major Edward Stone. He had spent 2 years operating behind German lines in France, had personally trained more than a dozen snipers now deployed throughout the European theatre. He was a small, quiet man with a scholar's vocabulary and a killer's eyes, and he pushed Maya harder than she had ever been pushed in her life. The first time she missed a target during training, a silhouette at 400 meters in a crosswind, he made her run 5 miles. Then set up and take the shot again. When she missed again, he made her run 5 more miles. By the end of the day, she had run nearly 30 miles and taken the shot 11 times. She finally made it on the 12th attempt, her muscles screaming, her vision blurred with exhaustion, operating on nothing but will and the refusal to fail. That, Major Stone told her, was the point. The shot you take when you're exhausted, uncomfortable, and afraid, that's the shot that matters. Anyone can hit a target on a calm day with a full night's sleep. Snipers hit targets when everything is working against them. He also taught her the psychological dimensions of her work, the weight of taking a life deliberately, from a distance, with time to think about what she was doing. "Some snipers are destroyed by this weight," he told her one evening as they cleaned weapons. "They see faces in their dreams. They cannot reconcile the intimacy of looking at a person through a scope with the finality of what they do next." He paused, met her eyes. "Others feel nothing, and that is perhaps worse, a kind of death inside that makes them something less than human." "What's the answer, sir?" "There is no answer, Carter. Only a choice. Feel the weight. Understand what you're doing. Know that it's necessary. That it serves a purpose larger than yourself. That the alternative, allowing those you target to continue their work, is worse than the act of stopping them." He handed her the cleaned rifle. This is not easy. It should not be easy. But it is possible. Maya thought about those words during the long nights in her barracks bunk, thought about the faces of the men she would target through her scope. Men with families, perhaps, with hopes and fears and reasons for what they did. She thought about whether she could do what was being asked of her. She decided that she could, because the alternative was to accept that her life would be defined by limitations others placed on her. Because somewhere in France, American soldiers were being cut down by German machine guns, and she had the ability to stop it, because her father had served. And now, it was her turn. In May 1944, Maya Carter was deployed to England as part of a team of OSS operatives preparing for the invasion of France. She was given the rank of corporal, assigned to a unit that existed only on paper, told that she would be inserted into France shortly after the initial landings to conduct targeted operations against high-value German positions. Her specific assignments would be determined based on battlefield conditions and the needs of advancing American forces. The team she joined consisted of 4 other operatives. Garrett Pierce, 28, a demolitions expert from Ohio who had been a mining engineer before the war. Quiet, precise, the kind of man who measured twice and cut once. Rosemary Walsh, 25, a radio operator from Boston with a sharp Irish accent and 4 languages spoken fluently: English, French, German, Italian. She had a gift for voices, for hearing patterns in static that others missed. Frank Novak, 30, a Czech-American who had been a Chicago police officer, specialized in close-quarters combat and urban operations. Had seen enough street violence to understand that survival often came down to who acted first. Silas Whitmore, 27, a reconnaissance specialist from Virginia who had an almost supernatural ability to move through any terrain without being detected. Men who worked with him swore he could disappear in an empty room. They were a strange group, brought together not by shared background or natural affinity, but by complementary skills and a willingness to operate outside normal military structures. They trained together for 3 weeks in the English countryside, learning to function as a unit, to anticipate each other's movements, to communicate through gestures and glances when silence was essential. Maya was the only sniper, the only black person, one of only 2 women. She waited for resentment, for challenges to her presence, for the resistance she had encountered throughout her life. It did not come. On the second day of training, Garrett Pierce asked her one question. "Can you hit a target at 200 meters?" Maya took the rifle he offered, fired 10 rounds, 10 holes in the center ring. Garrett nodded once. "Good. We need someone who can actually shoot straight." That was the extent of the evaluation. These were people who had been selected precisely because they could see past conventional categories, who judged others solely by capability. Rosemary Walsh had faced her own discrimination as an Irish Catholic woman in a Protestant-dominated intelligence agency. She recognized a kindred spirit in Maya. Frank Novak had worked with black officers in the Chicago police who had impressed him more than most of his white colleagues. Silas Whitmore was simply indifferent to everything except competence and mission success. They did not become friends, exactly. The work was too intense, the stakes too high, the future too uncertain for the normal processes of friendship. But they became something perhaps more valuable, a team that trusted each other completely, that would risk their lives for each other without hesitation, that functioned as a single organism with 5 bodies and 1 purpose. Maya Carter was inserted into France on June 10, 1944, 4 days after the initial landings. She parachuted into a field outside Carentan with Garrett Pierce. The other 3 members of her team landed several kilometers away. The plan was to link up within 24 hours. But German patrols were heavier than expected. It took them 3 days to finally reunite at a farmhouse run by a French family who supported the resistance. The family was named Fournier, a father, mother, and 3 children ranging in age from 8 to 16. They had been sheltering escaped prisoners and downed pilots for more than 2 years, at constant risk of discovery and execution. When Maya entered their kitchen and removed her helmet, revealing her face for the first time, the youngest child, a girl named Sylvie, stared at her with undisguised wonder. She had never seen a black person before. She asked her mother in rapid French that Maya could mostly follow if the American lady was made of chocolate. Madame Fournier hushed her daughter, apologized to Maya. Maya laughed. The first time she had laughed in days. She knelt down to Sylvie's level, spoke in careful, accented French. "I am not made of chocolate, but I wish I were. Then I would never be hungry." Sylvie considered this seriously. Then she offered Maya a piece of bread from her own small ration. It was one of the most generous gifts Maya would receive during the entire war. The team spent 2 weeks operating from the Fournier farmhouse and other safe locations, conducting reconnaissance, small-scale sabotage, gathering intelligence as American forces slowly pushed inland from the beaches. Maya did not fire her rifle during this period. The missions did not call for her particular skills, but she was learning the terrain, the German positions, the patterns of movement and reinforcement that would inform her work when the time came. That time came on August 12, 1944, when the team received orders to investigate a German position blocking the American advance towards Saint-Lô, a position that had already claimed 47 American lives in 72 hours. A position that would test everything Maya Carter had learned, every skill her father had taught her at that kitchen table, every lesson Major Stone had drilled into her through exhaustion and pain. A position defended by an 18-year-old German prodigy named Klaus Zimmermann. What happened next would save 300 American lives and haunt Maya Carter for the next 50 years. August 12, 1944. 3 days before the shot that would change everything. Silas Whitmore returned from his reconnaissance mission at dawn. He'd been gone for 18 hours, lying motionless in a drainage ditch 400 meters from the German position, watching, counting, mapping fields of fire in his mind. When he entered the safe house, his face told them everything before he spoke. "It's not what they think it is." The team gathered around the table. Rosemary Walsh poured lukewarm coffee from a dented pot. Garrett Pierce unrolled a hand-drawn map. Frank Novak lit a cigarette and waited. Maya Carter sat perfectly still, the way she always did before a mission, conserving energy, watching, listening. Silas pointed to the farmhouse sketched on the map. The briefing said 1 reinforced machine gun nest. That's wrong. It's a coordinated defensive system. 3 positions, all interconnected by communication trenches, overlapping fields of fire covering every approach. He traced lines with his finger. Primary position here, 2nd floor of the main farmhouse. MG-42 machine gun, excellent sight lines. Stone walls nearly a meter thick. The shooter... Silas paused. The shooter is exceptional. How exceptional? Garrett asked. 47 confirmed American casualties in 72 hours. 4 failed attempts to take the position. 2 infantry assaults. 1 artillery barrage that missed entirely. 1 tank disabled at 600 meters before it could get within effective range. Silas looked at each of them in turn. The Germans have been rotating crews, but the primary gunner stays constant. His name, according to intercepted radio traffic, is Klaus Zimmermann. Age 18, graduate of German sniper school, already credited with eliminating 2 Allied snipers who tried to take him. Frank Novak exhaled smoke slowly. 18 years old, and he's killed 47 men in 3 days? 47 that we know about, Silas said. The boy's a prodigy, and he has help. The secondary positions feed him intelligence, spotters, communications. He doesn't just shoot well, he thinks 3 moves ahead, anticipates where our forces will advance, and positions accordingly. Maya spoke for the first time. "Show me the blind spots." Silas looked at her. Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or concern. "There aren't many. The Germans built this position to be impregnable to conventional assault. But," he pointed to the northeast corner of the map, "here, there's a gap, about 30 meters wide. One of the outbuildings partially blocks the view from the main farmhouse. The secondary positions can't see it unless they know to look there specifically." "Range from that gap to the primary position?" Maya asked. 300 meters, give or take. "Angle?" "Difficult. You'd be shooting slightly upward. through a window opening, maybe 1 meter tall and 2 meters wide. And you'd only see a portion of the window. The rest is blocked by the outbuilding. Garrett Pierce leaned forward, studying the map. We could use demolitions. Approach at night. Plant charges at the base of the farmhouse. The communication trenches, Silas said. They'd see you coming. We'd lose the element of surprise. Diversionary assault? Frank suggested. Draw their attention while a smaller team infiltrates from another direction. The overlapping fields of fire make that problematic. There's no angle of approach that isn't covered by at least one of the positions. Maya traced the gap Silas had identified, calculated distances in her head, wind factors, bullet drop at 300 meters, the angle of elevation. I can make the shot, she said quietly. The room went silent. Rosemary Walsh set down her coffee cup. Garrett stopped studying the map. Even Frank, who had seen enough combat to be unshakable, looked at Maya with new intensity. It's not an easy shot, Silas said carefully. No, but it's possible. You'd have to wait for the target to move into your limited field of view. You'd have one chance, maybe less than a second, to acquire, aim, and fire. If you miss... I won't miss. If you miss, Silas continued, your muzzle flash reveals your position. The secondary guns will have you zeroed in within seconds. You'd be cut down before you could displace. Maya met his eyes. Then I won't miss. Garrett Pierce asked the question that mattered. What are the odds you can make this shot, Maya? She considered lying, considered inflating her confidence to make them feel better. But these were people who deserved truth. I don't know, she said. It depends on factors I can't predict until I'm in position. The light, the wind, the exact position of the target when he moves into my sight picture. She paused. But I've spent 10 years learning to make impossible shots. I spent 4 years putting pellets through bottle caps at 30 meters. I spent 2 years learning from my father and 6 months learning from Major Stone. Every shot I've ever taken has prepared me for this one. She looked around the table at each of them. And if I don't take it, how many more Americans die tomorrow? How many the day after that? No one answered. They knew she was right. Captain Morrison arrived that afternoon to review the plan. He listened to Silas's reconnaissance report, studied the map, asked technical questions about sight lines and firing positions. Then he turned to Maya. You understand what you're proposing? Yes, sir. You're valuable, Corporal Carter. Your skills will be needed for future operations. Sacrificing yourself for a single position, however troublesome, might not be the wisest use of resources. He didn't mention her race or gender. He didn't need to. The implication was clear. Was she sure she wanted to risk her life for a country that did not fully accept her? Maya had been asked variations of this question her entire life, by teachers who suggested she aim lower, by recruiters who told her to be realistic, by a world that wanted her to know her place. She gave Captain Morrison the same answer she always gave. Those 47 dead soldiers were Americans, sir. My countrymen. Their lives matter regardless of how this country treats me. I have the skills for this mission. If I don't use them, I have to live with knowing I could have acted and chose not to. Morrison nodded slowly. The operation is approved. You'll insert tomorrow night. The next 24 hours were the longest of Maya Carter's life. She prepared her equipment with obsessive care, cleaned her Springfield until it gleamed, checked and rechecked her ammunition, each round inspected for defects, each one loaded into magazines with precise attention. She studied Silas's sketches until she could see the position with her eyes closed, calculated angles and distances and wind effects, ran through the shot sequence in her mind hundreds of times, and she thought about what she was about to do, not the shot itself, which she had practiced thousands of times, but the finality of it, the life she would end. Major Stone had prepared her for this moment, had told her to feel the weight, but carry it anyway. She felt it now, felt the heaviness of what she was about to do, the knowledge that a man she had never met would die because of her action, that his family would grieve, that his story would end. She did not try to push this feeling away. She held it, examined it, accepted it, and then she set it aside and focused on her mission. That evening she wrote a letter to her parents, told them she loved them, thanked them for everything they had taught her, asked them to understand that what she was doing was necessary. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. She would not send it, but writing it helped. At midnight, she tried to sleep, failed, lay in her bunk staring at the ceiling, thinking about her father's words. It's what we do. August 15th, 1944, 0300 hours. The team inserted under cover of darkness, moving in single file through hedgerows and fields, 5 meters apart, hand signals only, stopping every few minutes to listen for patrols. The night was warm and humid, the air thick with the smell of vegetation and distant smoke. Artillery rumbled somewhere to the east, a constant background thunder that had become so familiar it barely registered. Rosemary Walsh remained at the safe house to monitor radio communications. The other 4 moved toward the German position, like ghosts. They reached the approach point at 0430, perhaps 90 minutes until dawn. Silas Whitmore led Maya to the edge of the corridor she had identified, the gap in the German defenses that would give her the shot. From here, she would proceed alone. The others would take up positions to provide covering fire if she was detected, and to support her withdrawal after the shot. Garrett Pierce squeezed her shoulder once, a gesture of solidarity and good luck. Good hunting, Maya. Then they were gone, melting into the darkness. Maya began her approach. The corridor was approximately 150 meters long, running along the base of a gentle slope covered with tall grass and scattered brush. She moved slowly, staying low, pausing every few meters to scan for threats. The grass was wet with dew. It soaked through her uniform within minutes, the moisture cold against her skin. A slight breeze came from the southwest, perhaps 5 to 7 kilometers per hour. She would need to account for that in her aim. She reached the depression behind the stone wall at 0515, approximately 45 minutes until sunrise. She settled into position, arranged her equipment with methodical precision. The Springfield placed carefully on the stone, her body positioned for maximum stability and minimum exposure. She began her observation. Through the scope, she could see the second-floor window of the farmhouse, a dark rectangle, approximately 2 meters wide and 1 meter tall. The machine gun was positioned in the right side of the window, its barrel just visible in the pre-dawn darkness. But the gunner was not at his weapon. She would have to wait. Waiting was what she had trained for. Waiting was what she did better than almost anything else. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. The rhythm her father had taught her at that kitchen table in Chicago, the patience he drilled into her through 10,000 practice sessions with rats that gave no second chances. She monitored the wind, watching the grass move, feeling it against her face, calculating the drift it would cause at 300 meters. The sun rose at 0602. The light changed from grey to gold, illuminating the farmhouse and the fields around it. Maya could now see the interior of the second-floor room more clearly. The machine gun, the sandbags stacked around it, the dark space behind it where the gunner would sit. Still no movement. She continued to wait. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. Her muscles began to ache from holding the same position. She ignored the discomfort, focused on the window, on the breathing, on the absolute stillness that would make the shot possible. At 0647, she saw him, a figure moving in the shadows at the back of the room, stepping forward toward the machine gun. She could not see him clearly yet, just a shape, a suggestion of movement. She placed her finger on the trigger, took up the slack, prepared to fire the moment he stepped into the light. He did, and Maya Carter froze. The gunner was young, that was her first thought. He could not have been more than 18 or 19. Thin face, dark hair that fell across his forehead. He looked tired. He looked scared. He looked like a boy who had been placed behind a terrible machine and told to do terrible things, who had done them because he did not know what else to do. Klaus Zimmermann. Through the scope, she could see details that made him human. A small scar on his left cheek, the way he rubbed his eyes as if trying to wake himself up, the slight tremor in his hands as he checked the machine gun's belt feed. For a fraction of a second, Maya hesitated. She saw not a target but a person. Someone's son, someone's brother, someone with a life and a future that she was about to end. She felt the weight that Major Stone had warned her about, and for that moment, it was too heavy to bear. Then she thought about the 47 American soldiers who had died because of this boy's aim. She thought about their families, their futures, their lives that had ended in that corridor of no return. She thought about the soldiers who would die today if she did not act, who were probably already moving into position for another assault, trusting that the obstacle would be removed. She thought about her father, about the kitchen table lessons, about the weight he had carried for 25 years, the burden of serving a country that would not claim him, the cost of doing what was necessary even when it broke something inside you. And she understood that this was what it meant to serve. Not glory, not recognition, not the clean satisfaction of simple choices. This, the terrible necessity of doing what had to be done, feeling the full weight of it, and carrying on anyway. She exhaled slowly. She steadied her aim. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, she fired. The Springfield made a single, sharp crack that echoed across the fields. Through the scope, Maya saw Klaus Zimmermann jerk backward and fall. She did not see him hit the ground. She was already moving, breaking down her position, preparing to withdraw. She had rehearsed this a dozen times in her mind. The exact sequence of actions, the precise route she would take, the timing that would get her out of the corridor before the German response. But there was no response. The secondary positions, which should have opened fire the moment they heard the shot, remained silent. The farmhouse, which should have erupted with activity as the defenders scrambled to locate the threat, was still. For a long moment, nothing happened at all. Then, Garrett Pierce's voice came over her earpiece, calm, but with an undercurrent of confusion. "Target down. No movement from secondary positions." "Maya, I think they're confused. They don't know what happened." Maya realized what had occurred. Her shot had been so precise, so unexpected, that the other defenders did not understand what they were seeing. Their commander, their exceptional gunner, had simply fallen. There had been no assault, no artillery, no obvious threat, just a man collapsing at his weapon, with no apparent cause. They did not know they were under attack. They did not know where to shoot. This confusion lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but 30 seconds was enough. Silas Whitmore's voice came through next. "Secondary gunners withdrawing to the farmhouse. They're abandoning the outbuildings." This was the opportunity. With the secondary positions unmanned, American forces could advance through corridors that had been covered before. If they moved quickly, they could overrun the farmhouse before the defenders reorganized. Garrett was already on the radio to Captain Morrison, reporting the situation, requesting immediate support. Within minutes, the message was relayed up the chain of command. A company of infantry that had been waiting for the order began moving toward the position. The assault on the farmhouse took less than 20 minutes. The defenders, disorganized and demoralized by the loss of their leader, offered only scattered resistance. By 0730, the position was in American hands. The road to Saint-Colomb was open. Maya Carter did not participate in the assault. Her mission was complete. Her orders were to withdraw to the team's rally point and await extraction. She moved through the corridor she had traversed earlier, her mind strangely empty, her body operating on the automatic discipline of her training. She did not think about what she had done. She did not think about anything at all. She reached the rally point at 0800 and found her team waiting for her. Garrett Pierce embraced her, a quick, fierce hug that surprised them both. Frank Novak nodded once, his version of high praise. Silas Whitmore simply said, "Clean shot." Rosemary Walsh was monitoring radio traffic. She reported that American forces had secured the farmhouse with minimal casualties. The position that had claimed 47 American lives in 3 days had been neutralized with no additional losses. The company commander was calling it a miracle. It was not a miracle. It was a single bullet placed precisely at exactly the right moment by a woman who had spent her entire life preparing for that moment. But Maya did not say this. She did not say anything. She sat down against a tree, closed her eyes, allowed herself to feel for the first time the magnitude of what she had done. The weight was there. Just as Major Stone had promised, she had taken a life. She had looked through her scope at a young man's face and decided that he would die. She would carry that weight for the rest of her life, would see that face in quiet moments, would wonder about who he had been and what he might have become. This was the cost of what she had done, and she would pay it. But she had also saved lives. The soldiers who would have died in the next assault, and the next, and the next. They would go home to their families because of what she had done. The 47 who had already fallen were beyond her help. But she had stopped the count there, had prevented the number from growing. This was not redemption. It did not balance the scales or erase the weight, but it was something. It was the reason she had pulled the trigger. The team was extracted that evening and returned to their base in England for debriefing. Captain Morrison commended Maya's performance, recommended her for decoration, a recommendation that would, as Mrs. Davies had warned, disappear into the bureaucracy without result. The official record of the action at Saint-Colomb would credit the assault to the infantry company that had taken the farmhouse. Maya Carter's name would appear nowhere. She was not surprised. She had known from the beginning that her service might never be acknowledged, that she was operating outside the boundaries of what the military was willing to admit. She had accepted this condition when she took the assignment, and she found now, in the moment, that it mattered less than she had expected. She knew what she had done. Her team knew. That would have to be enough. But the story did not end there. Because while the official military bureaucracy was content to bury Maya Carter's contribution, the soldiers who had been there wanted to know what had happened. How had the position fallen so quickly? Why had the legendary gunner suddenly dropped at his weapon? Who had taken the shot that opened the road to Saint-Colomb? Rumors spread through the ranks, as rumors do. A sniper, some said, an OSS operative, a woman, according to others, one of those secret agents who did things the regular military could not. And a black woman, whispered a few who had heard something from someone who had seen something. A black woman sniper. Could that be true? Could the military actually have allowed such a thing? The soldiers did not know whether to believe these rumors. They seemed too strange, too far outside the bounds of how the world was supposed to work. But they repeated them anyway. One of these soldiers was Sergeant First Class Robert Holden, a 34-year-old from Georgia who had lost his best friend in the third assault on the Saint-Colomb position. Holden was not a man who questioned the racial order of the military or society. He had grown up in the segregated South and accepted its categories as natural and proper. But he had also learned, over 18 months of combat, that courage and competence did not follow the color lines he had been taught to expect. So when he heard the rumor about a black woman sniper, he did not dismiss it out of hand. In September 1944, when his company was rotated back to England for rest and refit, he started asking questions. It took him 2 weeks to find someone who would talk. An OSS officer, 3 drinks into an evening at a London pub, confirmed that the rumors were true, that a Negro woman named Carter had indeed taken the shot at Saint-Colomb, that she was one of the best marksmen the agency had ever trained. The officer would not say more, but he did not need to. Holden wrote a letter to his hometown newspaper, describing what he had learned, writing that a colored woman had saved his life and the lives of dozens of other American soldiers, that she deserved recognition for her service regardless of her race or sex. The letter was not published, but Holden had sent copies to other papers as well, papers in New York, Chicago, Washington. The Chicago Defender, the most influential black newspaper in the country, did not ignore him. On October 28, 1944, they published Holden's letter under the headline, "Georgia Sergeant credits Negro woman sniper with saving his life." The story was picked up by other black papers across the country. Within a week, Maya Carter was famous, at least within the black community. Her name was spoken in churches and barbershops, in living rooms and factory break rooms. The military was not pleased. OSS operations were classified. The revelation of Carter's identity violated security protocols. More importantly, her sudden fame threatened to force the military to acknowledge her service. Maya was pulled from active operations, assigned to administrative duties at the OSS facility in London. She was not disciplined. Her performance had been too exemplary for that. But she was effectively benched, removed from the work she had trained to do. She accepted this with the same composure she had brought to every other obstacle in her career. Colonel William Donovan, the founder and director of the OSS, pushed back against the pressure to sideline Carter. He argued that she was too valuable to waste on administrative work. He did not win the argument entirely, but he won enough of it to get Carter back into training for future operations. She returned to active duty in December 1944. Just as the German counteroffensive in the Ardennes was beginning, the OSS needed every capable operative it had. Maya Carter was inserted into Belgium on December 23, 1944. Her mission? Identify and neutralize German command and control positions coordinating the offensive. The conditions were brutal: deep snow, bitter cold that turned fingers numb in seconds, limited supplies, German forces advancing faster than anyone had anticipated. She spent the next 3 weeks operating alone in the forests of the Ardennes, moving from position to position, taking shots when opportunities presented themselves, gathering intelligence when they did not. She would later say that those weeks were the hardest of her service, not because of the physical conditions, though they were severe, not because of the danger, though it was constant, but because of the isolation. Long days and nights with no one to talk to, no one to confirm that she was still human, still connected to the world she was fighting to protect. She talked to herself sometimes, just to hear a voice, recited poetry she had memorized as a child, composed letters to her parents that she would never send. She made 7 confirmed kills during the Ardennes campaign, 7 German officers and senior NCOs whose removal disrupted enemy operations and saved American lives. She was never detected, never engaged. She moved through the forests like a ghost, appearing, striking, vanishing before anyone knew she was there. When she was finally extracted in mid-January 1945, she had lost 18 pounds, had frostbite on 3 toes that would trouble her for the rest of her life. Captain Morrison told her that her performance had been extraordinary, that she had contributed more to the American defensive effort than many entire units. He told her that she would receive a Bronze Star for her service, a decoration that would be awarded secretly, recorded in a classified file, never publicly acknowledged. Maya thanked him. Then she asked when she could return to the field. She was deployed twice more before the war in Europe ended, once into Germany itself in March 1945, once into Austria in late April. These operations were shorter, less intense. By then, the German military was collapsing. There were fewer high-value targets to engage, but Maya performed her duties with the same precision and dedication she had shown from the beginning. By the time Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, she had 18 confirmed kills. 18 enemies who would not threaten American soldiers again because of her skill and courage. The war in Europe was over, but for Maya Carter, the struggle was just beginning. Maya Carter returned to the United States in June 1945. She had expected to be discharged immediately, sent back to civilian life with a handshake and a train ticket. Instead, the OSS wanted her to remain, for debriefing, for evaluation, to participate in training programs for the next generation of operatives. The war with Japan was still ongoing. There was talk of deploying snipers to the Pacific Theater. Maya agreed to stay. She was not sure what she would do in civilian life anyway. Her skills were not easily transferable to peacetime employment, and she was not ready to return to typing and filing. The OSS, for all its limitations, was the only place she had ever felt fully capable, fully utilized. She would stay as long as they wanted her. She was at the OSS facility in Virginia on August 6th when news came that an atomic bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, a second bomb fell on Nagasaki. On August 15th, Japan announced its surrender. The war was finally, fully over. Maya heard the news with other personnel gathered around a radio in the common room. There was cheering, embracing, tears of relief and joy. She participated in these celebrations, grateful that the war was over, grateful that the dying would stop. But she also felt something else, a hollowness, an uncertainty, a sense that the purpose that had organized her life for the past 3 years had suddenly vanished. What would she do now? Who would she be? The OSS was dissolved in October 1945, its functions transferred to other agencies. Maya Carter was given an honorable discharge, a final handshake from Captain Morrison, and a train ticket back to Chicago. Her service record was classified, her decorations noted only in files that would not be opened for decades. As far as the official military history was concerned, she had spent the war typing and filing at Fort Des Moines. She returned to her parents' apartment on the south side, to the same 2 rooms where she had grown up, where she had first learned to shoot. Her father was there, older now, frailer, the limp more pronounced than before. Her mother embraced her and wept, and thanked God for bringing her daughter home safely. They did not ask about what she had done during the war. They had learned from Isaiah's experience that some things could not be spoken about, that some weights had to be carried alone. Maya tried to find work. She was 24 years old, high school education, 3 years of classified military experience she could not mention. She applied for secretarial positions, was told she was overqualified. She applied for factory jobs, was told the positions had been filled by returning soldiers. She applied at the same insurance company where she had worked before the war, was told they had no openings. The country that had used her skills to win the war had no place for her now that it was over. She found work eventually, a position as a file clerk at a black-owned law firm. It paid less than she had earned before the war. She took it because she needed money, because she had no other options. She spent her days organizing documents and typing briefs, using perhaps 1% of her capabilities, trying not to think about what she had been and what she had done. The years passed. Maya moved into her own apartment, a small place on 47th Street that she kept as immaculate as her mother had kept their family home. She dated occasionally, never seriously. She found it difficult to connect with men who did not know her real history, and she could not tell them. She made friends with other women at the law firm, women who knew her as quiet, competent, private. She told them she had served in the Women's Army Corps during the war, in administrative support. They had no reason to doubt her. Her father passed in 1952, his heart finally giving out after years of strain from his old wounds. Maya was with him at the end, holding his hand, telling him that she was proud of him, that his service had mattered even if the country had not recognized it. He looked at her with eyes that knew everything she had not told him. "I'm proud of you too, baby girl." Then he was gone. Her mother passed 5 years later, and Maya was alone. She continued her work at the law firm, rising eventually to office manager, a position of modest responsibility and equally modest compensation. She lived quietly, modestly, invisibly, the life that America had prescribed for women like her. But something was changing in the country. The civil rights movement was growing, challenging the segregation and discrimination that had confined Black Americans for generations. In 1954, the Supreme Court declared school segregation unconstitutional. In 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and spoke of his dream. Maya watched these events with growing hope and growing frustration. Hope because change seemed finally possible, because the structures that had limited her life were beginning to crack. Frustration because she had fought for this country, had risked her life and taken lives in its service, and still she was invisible. Still her contribution was unacknowledged. Still the military that had used her pretended she did not exist. She began to write in 1963, not for publication, not at first, just for herself, to record what she had done and what she had seen. She wrote about her training, her missions, her team. She wrote about the farmhouse at St. Colombe and Klaus Zimmermann's face in her scope. She wrote about the weight she carried, the cost of carrying it. She wrote about what it meant to serve a country that would not claim her service. She wrote for 5 years, filling notebook after notebook with her small, precise handwriting. When she finished, she had more than 500 pages, a complete account of her time with the OSS, from recruitment to discharge. She did not know what to do with it. The story seemed too improbable to be believed, and she had no documentation to support it. Who would take seriously a black woman file clerk who claimed to have been a sniper in the Second World War? The answer came in 1968. A young historian named Dr. Patricia Reynolds contacted her. Reynolds was writing a book about African American women who had served in the military during the war. She had come across the old Chicago Defender article about Maya Carter. She wanted to know if the story was true. She wanted to interview Maya for her book. Maya hesitated. She had spent more than 20 years in silence, keeping her history buried, protecting herself from disbelief and dismissal. The idea of speaking openly, of subjecting herself to scrutiny and potential ridicule, was frightening. But she also knew that she could not carry this weight alone forever. She needed to share it. She needed the truth to be known. She agreed to the interview. Then she gave Dr. Reynolds her notebooks. Patricia Reynolds was stunned by what she read. Here was not merely an account of military service, but a detailed chronicle of OSS operations in France and Belgium, written by a participant with direct knowledge of missions that remained classified. Here was evidence of a black woman serving in a combat role decades before such service was officially permitted. Here was a story that challenged virtually everything the military had said about race and gender and capability. But Reynolds was also a careful scholar. She knew that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. She could not simply take Maya's notebooks at face value. She needed corroboration. She began to research. It took her 2 years, but she found it. In the newly opened archives of the OSS, she discovered personnel records confirming Maya Carter's service as an operative, her training as a marksman, her deployment to France and Belgium. She found after-action reports from the Saint-Colomb operation that mentioned, though did not name, a sniper who had neutralized the German position. She found Captain Morrison's recommendation for the Bronze Star, the one that had been awarded secretly and buried. And she found Garrett Pierce. Pierce had survived the war and returned to Ohio, where he worked as an engineer and raised 3 children. He had never forgotten Maya Carter or the missions they had conducted together. When Reynolds contacted him in 1970, he agreed immediately to be interviewed. He described the Saint-Colomb operation in detail, confirming every element of Maya's account. He described her as the finest marksman he had ever seen, one of the bravest soldiers he had served with. He said she deserved to be honored for what she had done, that it was a disgrace she had been forgotten. Reynolds interviewed the other surviving members of the team as well. Rosemary Walsh, who had become a translator at the State Department, Frank Novak, who had returned to the Chicago police and risen to captain. They all told the same story. They all remembered Maya Carter. Reynolds published her book in 1972, Invisible Warriors, African American Women in the Second World War. An entire chapter was devoted to Maya Carter, describing her life, her training, her service, and her long years of anonymity. The book included photographs, excerpts from Maya's notebooks, statements from her former teammates. It was the first public documentation of what Maya had done. The book received modest attention when it was published, positive reviews in academic journals and the black press, limited coverage elsewhere. But it planted a seed. People now knew that Maya Carter existed, that her story was real, that the rumors from 1944 had been true. Over the years that followed, her story spread, cited in other histories, mentioned in documentaries, taught in classrooms. She became, gradually, a symbol of the hidden contributions that Black Americans had made to the war effort. Maya experienced this growing recognition with mixed feelings. She was grateful that the truth was finally known, that she would not die with her service unacknowledged. But she was also uncomfortable with the attention, with being treated as a symbol rather than a person. She had not done what she did for recognition or to make a political statement. She had done it because she had the ability and the opportunity, because American soldiers were dying. She did not want to be turned into something she was not. She also worried that her story was being simplified, flattened into a feel-good narrative of triumph over adversity. Yes, she had overcome obstacles. Yes, she had proved the doubters wrong. But she had also taken 18 lives. She had looked through her scope at 18 human beings and ended their existence. This was not triumph. This was tragedy. Necessary tragedy. Justified tragedy. But tragedy nonetheless. She wanted people to understand this. She wanted them to feel the weight. In 1977, Maya agreed to speak at a conference on women in the military, her first public appearance since the publication of Reynolds' book. She was 56 years old, retired now from the law firm, living on a small pension and social security. She walked to the podium with the help of a cane. Her frostbitten toes had never fully healed. She looked out at an audience of perhaps 200 people, most of them women, many of them black, all of them waiting to hear her story. She spoke for an hour. She described her childhood on the South Side, her father's teachings, her determination to serve. She described her training, her deployment, her missions. She described the farmhouse at Saint-Colomb, the approach through the corridor, the wait for the gunner to appear, the moment of hesitation when she saw his face. And then she described the shot, the exhale, the trigger pull, the single sharp crack of the rifle, the young man falling backward and out of her sight, the weight that descended on her and had never lifted. "I do not regret what I did," she said quietly. "The mission was necessary. The lives I saved were worth the life I took. But I want you to understand that there was no glory in it, no satisfaction, no triumph." She paused, let the silence hold. There was only the terrible necessity of doing what had to be done, and carrying the cost. She told them that she hoped they would never have to make the choices she had made, but if they did, if they ever found themselves in a position where they had the capability and the opportunity to save lives through their own skill and courage, she hoped they would not hesitate. She hoped they would do what was necessary, feel the weight, and carry on. She received a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of women approached her, thanking her, embracing her, telling her that her story had inspired them. A young black woman in Army ROTC said that she was joining the military because of Maya Carter, that she wanted to prove that women like them could serve at the highest levels. Maya took the young woman's hand. "Serve with honor," she said. "Value your own humanity and the humanity of those you face, and never forget the weight of what you might be called upon to do." Recognition came slowly, but it came. Over the next 7 years, Maya's story continued to spread through military history circles. Documentaries interviewed her surviving teammates. Academic researchers cross-referenced her account with newly declassified OSS files. The evidence became undeniable. What had begun as rumor in 1944, been suppressed by military bureaucracy, and rediscovered by one historian in 1972, was now entering the official record. In 1984, the Army formally acknowledged Maya Carter's service, releasing portions of her classified record and confirming her role in operations across France, Belgium, Germany, and Austria. 3 years later, the recognition became tangible. In 1987, she was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor. In a ceremony at the Pentagon, attended by her surviving teammates and dozens of officials and historians, the citation described her actions at Saint-Colomb and throughout the European campaign, praising her extraordinary heroism and selfless service in combat operations. She was 66 years old. She walked to the podium with her cane, accepted the medal from the Army Chief of Staff, gave a brief speech thanking her parents, her teammates, and the country that had finally claimed her service. She did not mention the decades of invisibility, the discrimination, the deliberate erasure. She did not need to. Everyone in the room knew. The ceremony was covered by national media, a brief story, perhaps 2 minutes, buried in the middle of the broadcast. But it was enough. Maya Carter was finally, officially, a hero. She lived 5 more years. On October 15, 1992, She died peacefully in her apartment, surrounded by photographs of her parents and her team and the life she had built from silence and service. She was buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. A black woman who had served before black people were permitted to serve. A sniper who had operated before women were allowed anywhere near combat. The headstone gave her name, her rank, and her dates of birth and death. Beneath that, a single word: marksman. Garrett Pierce attended the funeral. He was 76 himself, frail and white-haired, using a wheelchair now. He sat in the front row during the service, listening as speaker after speaker praised Maya Carter's courage, her skill, her contribution to the war effort and to the cause of equality. When the service was over, he remained in his chair, looking at the flag-draped coffin. A reporter approached him, asked what he remembered most about Maya Carter. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was steady but soft. I remember waiting at the rally point after Saint-Colomb, not knowing if she would make it back. He paused, seemed to be seeing something far away. I remember the relief when she appeared, moving through the trees with that smooth, silent walk she had. I remember looking at her face and seeing the weight she was already carrying, the knowledge of what she had done. Another pause, and I remember thinking that I had never seen anyone so capable and so human at the same time. He looked up at the reporter. She was the bravest person I ever knew. Not because she was fearless, she was afraid, but she did what was necessary anyway. She felt the cost and paid it anyway. She carried the weight and never let it crush her. His eyes returned to the coffin. That's what courage is, not the absence of fear, the decision to act in spite of it. The reporter thanked him and moved on. Garrett remained where he was, looking at the coffin, thinking about August 1944, about a shot that had traveled 300 meters and changed everything. Thinking about a young woman from Chicago who had seen what no one else could see, and had done what no one else could do. The wind stirred the flags around the graveside. Somewhere in the distance, a bugle played taps. Garrett Pierce closed his eyes, let the memories wash over him. The fear, the chaos, the strange beauty of doing something impossible with people he trusted completely. The morning after Saint-Colomb, when they had learned what Maya's shot had accomplished, the embraces, the tears, the overwhelming gratitude. He opened his eyes, looked at the coffin one last time. Then he nodded once, a soldier's farewell, and let his family wheel him away. Maya Carter's story did not end with her death. In the years that followed, her example continued to inspire historians who documented her service, soldiers who followed in her footsteps, young people who learned that barriers were meant to be broken. In 1994, the first women graduated from Army Sniper School, an achievement that would have been impossible without Maya, and others like her, who had proved what women could do. In 2015, the military opened all combat positions to women, finally acknowledging what Maya had demonstrated 70 years earlier. Today, her name is taught in military academies and history classes. Her Distinguished Service Cross is displayed at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., alongside her Springfield rifle and the notebooks in which she recorded her service. Visitors stand before these artifacts and read about what she did, the training, the missions, the shot at Saint-Colomb that opened the road and saved the lives. But the artifacts can only tell part of the story. They cannot convey the isolation of waiting alone in a sniper's hide, the intimacy of looking at a target through a scope, the weight of the choice to fire. They cannot convey what it meant to be a black woman in a white man's military, to be dismissed and ignored and erased, to carry on anyway because the work was too important to abandon. They cannot convey the decades of silence, the anonymity, the slow and grudging recognition that came only at the end of a long life. For that, we need the story itself. In the summer of 2018, a group of ROTC cadets visited the National Museum of African American History and Culture. They stood before the display case containing Maya Carter's Distinguished Service Cross. Their instructor, a young captain who had written her thesis on women in military history, told them about the farmhouse at Saint-Colomb, the fortified position, the corridor of no return, the single shot that opened the road. She told them about the weight, about what it meant to take a life deliberately, from a distance, with time to think about what you were doing. She told them that Maya Carter had felt that weight and carried it for 50 years, that she had done so because the alternative, to stand aside when she had the ability to act, was not something she could live with. The cadets listened in silence. Some of them would go on to serve in combat. Some of them would face choices similar to the one Maya had faced behind that stone wall. They did not know this yet, could not know what lay ahead, but they knew now that it was possible, that someone had done it before them, had felt what they might feel, had chosen what they might choose. That was the gift Maya Carter had given them. Not a formula, not a guarantee, just the knowledge that the path existed, that it could be walked, that the weight could be borne. The instructor finished her presentation, gave the cadets time to reflect. One young woman, a sophomore from Detroit, lingered at the display case after the others had moved on. She studied the medal, the rifle, the faded notebooks behind the glass. She thought about Maya Carter at her age, practicing in alleys, dreaming of something more. She made a silent promise to herself that day, to serve with honor, to push past every barrier, to carry whatever weight was asked of her, to never forget. Outside the museum, the sun was setting over Washington, D.C., painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The cadets gathered on the steps, talking quietly about what they had seen. In a few years, they would scatter across the world, to bases and deployments and missions they could not yet imagine. They would face challenges and make choices and pay costs, but they would not face them alone. They would carry with them the example of those who had gone before, the pioneers, the barrier breakers, the quiet heroes who had proved what was possible. They would carry Maya Carter with them, and in carrying her memory, they would honor not just what she had done, but what she had taught them about courage and sacrifice and the terrible, necessary weight of doing what must be done, even when the world will not witness it, even when history tries to erase it, even when the only reward is the knowledge that you did what was right. That, Maya Carter would have said, is enough. That has to be enough, because sometimes the most important battles are the ones that go unrecorded, and the greatest heroes are the ones whose names we almost never learn.